Okay, I'll call to order the regular session of the City of Leavenworth Planning Commission. We do have a quorum. Commissioners have received minutes from the August 7th meeting. Are there any corrections or additions to be made to the minutes? Okay, if not, I'll go ahead and accept a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. New business is 2017-17 SUB West Glen First Plat, Final Plat. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you said, this is a request for West Glen First Plat, it's a final plat. In June of this year, a preliminary plat of this property was approved by the Planning Commission. It was under the name of Wolf Farms at that time. The applicant just has changed the name, but it is the same property and the same plat. The subject property is 18.35 acres, and this final plat consists of 49 residential lots. Lots 1 through 26 in the northern part of the final plat are going to be standard single-family homes with an average lot size of just over 10,000 square feet. Lots 27 through 49 in the southern part of the final plat are intended to be smaller lots, and they will be maintenance provided single-family homes, and those have an average lot size of just under 8,000 square feet. The DRC did review this plat at the August 17th meeting. There were no major issues found at that time, just some minor technical things with the plat, but nothing that warranted any major changes. Improvements to New Lawrence Road will be taking place as part of the development of this property, and I believe the City Commission has finalized plans on that. So the design and construction of that improvement should be getting underway shortly. New Lawrence Road will be widened and improved from 20th Street up just past, I believe, the northern extent of this property. It's my understanding that the intent is to widen it and improve it to where Muncie Road would come through from the east at some point in the future. Again, this is a 49 lot final plat for the West Glen subdivision. If you have any questions, I can answer those, and the applicant is here as well.
The zoning is going to remain R16?
That's correct. Yes, the Planning Commission and City Commission approved the rezoning earlier this year as well.
Julie, do those improvements along New Lawrence Road include sidewalks to connect to 20th Street?
I am not sure on the sidewalks. I don't believe the design has taken place yet. I'm not sure that those details have been worked out. The applicant might actually have more knowledge on that than I would.
If you'd like to come on up.
Members of the Commission, Mike Riley, Virginia State Park. Yes, the design does include sidewalks.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Don't we need the purpose for the tracks denoted on the plat?
Can I have that copy?
I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, they are on there, I know. Yeah, under the dedication
Okay, try to say this.
section, about 6 paragraphs down, tracks A through I, owned by the Homes Association and intended for landscaping, monuments, drainage, open space, etc.
Could you go over, I guess, to review for the older people here and to explain it the first time for the newer people, what the process is as far as platting and where we are right now and what the involvement of the Planning Commission is in that process?
Sure. So what the Planning Commission approved earlier this year in June was the preliminary plat, and that's basically the overall layout for the entire development. That would have included all of the lots. I believe there were around 120 lots-ish on that. And so once that's approved, then the applicant can come in with the final plat, and that can either be the entire subdivision or just a portion, whatever they're ready to develop at that time. And that's going to really give the final approval to those lots, utility easements, right-of-way. Once the Planning Commission approves that, it will go to the City Commission. Since it is dedicating new right-of-way, they'll have to give the final approval on that, and then the final plat will go over to the county register of deeds to be recorded, and these lots will become lots of record, and it will be officially divided up.
Any questions on the process or on the staff report itself for this particular plat? Any discussion among the commissioners? Any questions for the applicant? Okay. Our options that are available to us at this time are to either approve the final plat, to deny the final plat, or to table the issue for additional information. And if there's no further discussion, I'll go ahead and take a motion at this time.
I motion to approve 2017-17 sub West Glen first plat, final plat.
And that's based on the findings and the staff report?
Correct.
Thank you. We do have a motion to approve the final plat. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. All in favor signify by raising your right hand. Opposed? Unanimous.
Julie, in the exterior plat corners, you might want to have the plat corrected to read Leavenworth City regulations instead of county before they go to the commission.
Fourth bullet down under note.
On which section is that?
Under
Upper left
notes,
corner.
Oh,
the fourth
okay.
note down.
It says Leavenworth.
Oh, yep, I see.
Regulation.
Thank you. Second item is a discussion item on the development regulations and a potential review of the regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you're all aware, we just recently in 2015, first part of 2016, went through a comprehensive update to the development regulations and did basically an overhaul of the entire document. As we've used it throughout the year, some minor little things come up here and there, basically just little housekeeping items that need to be reviewed and possibly tweaked. It is really good and standard practice to go through a set of regulations like these on an annual basis and make those changes and take care of those items. And so what we're talking about tonight is really just what we intend to be the first of an annual review of the regulations to clean up any areas that need to be cleaned up. The ones that we've identified, I've got listed here and I'll go through them briefly, but just to kind of give you the process. We will have to have a public hearing to adopt any changes, and so tonight is really just a first discussion of that to let you know this is what we're looking at doing. Barring anything unforeseen or any other major changes that might come up, our intent is to publish for a public hearing for next month's Planning Commission, go over any final changes. Staff will have those written up with the actual verbiage that will be included in the regulations so that we can review those, hold the public hearing, and then you'll make a recommendation and that will get forwarded on to the City Commission. At that point, they'll have to give the final approval, and then we'll get these incorporated. So just the ones that we've identified so far, working through these throughout the year. The first one is section 2.02, platting. We've got plats broken down into several categories. The smallest two are administrative plats and minor subdivisions. Administrative plats are really intended to be lot splits or lot line adjustments. Say two neighbors are just wanting to sell 20 feet of one property to the neighbor and so move that lot line. So just minor items like that are intended to be approved at the staff level so that those wouldn't have to come to the Planning Commission. And then minor subdivisions are actual subdivisions that would include 5 or fewer lots, and that would be including no right-of-way or easements. And those would come to the Planning Commission. The language in the development regulations doesn't differentiate between a process for those two, so we just need to get that cleaned up to make it clear the process for each of those. Section 2.04, special use permits, the process on those. Right now, the regs do not have a process for submitting a protest petition. State statute and prior legal precedent has ruled that the protest petition for special use permits should be the same as for rezonings. And so we've already got that language in the rezoning section. We just basically need to get that language into the special use permit section as well. And then also, the city commission has to give the final approval on special use permits, and we don't have that language in there either. So again, we've got the language in the rezoning section, we just need to get it also copied into the special use permit section to get that process complete and outlined in the regulations. Next section is 4.04, which are the use standards. In the previous version of the development regulations that were done in 2011, the version that we revised and updated this past year, there was specific language regarding home occupations and home daycares. It was not our intention to change those requirements, but in our desire to kind of pare down the language and get it condensed, that language was just left out. And so we've had some questions come up over the last year about specifics regarding those two uses, and we just don't have the language in here to address it. So we need to get that same language put back into the regulations so that it's covered. The next is, again, in section 4.04, there's a section addressing yardicles, and that is a term that was sort of come up with prior to me. I'm not sure if any of you were here when that was come up with. It's not an actual word, and so it's always kind of driven me nuts. I know it's driven commissioners nuts, it drives applicants nuts, and so I would just propose to change that term to miscellaneous yard decor, since that's really what it's addressing. Things like flagpoles, barbecue stoves. So just kind of changing that word so that we don't have a
Made-up word.
A made-up word in the regulations. Good practice, I think. The next section, 5.02, required parking. Again, this is just something that got left out when we did the revision. There's a lengthy list of specific uses that we have parking requirements for, things like restaurants, office use, commercial use, those types of things. And then there should be just a general parking requirement of 1 space for every 200 square feet for uses that are not specifically listed. That's sort of a standard practice, and we did have that before. That just got cut out, so we need to get that back in there. The next would be in the same section, 5.02, and that would be to consider an allowance for reduced parking for historic structures. And that's something that has come up, and looking at some other cities, most of them have that allowance to reduce parking requirements for historic structures. And the intent would be that if you're taking, say, like we just looked at the Broadway School, if you're repurposing a historic building, not wanting to really change that lot in order to get in a lot of parking. And so that's something that we could put an allowance in that to say that, the parking may be reduced on a case-by-case basis, or just that it would need to be reviewed, something like that. So not giving a blanket reduction, but just giving that allowance for cases that might warrant it in order to preserve that historic property.
Then you haven't decided on any wording on that yet? Are you going to be allowing the planning commission to make these allowances, or the recommendation from the city engineer? Are you going to?
It would be my intent that staff could review it, and then the final decision would be for the planning commission to, approve what was recommended by staff, or to make additional changes or suggestions to that.
Instead of having to go through the variance process then?
Right, just for those, properties that are specifically listed on a historic structure or historic register. So that they
We have a
wouldn't-
considerable amount of historic properties in town,
Yeah,
and a lot of properties that use the shared parking for the downtown space. It should be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
yes.
and in the downtown area, there is actually no parking requirement for central business district zoning, since there is so much shared parking and general use parking. So those properties are taken care of, but there are a number of others throughout town. So yeah, it would really be our intent to have it be a case-by-case basis. And I would envision being it, that a variance could be granted by the planning commission instead of having to go through the Board of Zoning Appeals for that parking reduction, and really have it be something that this board would look at for any property that came through. And then the final one that I had on here was section 6.08 regarding fences, specifically commercial areas. The language, it says just commercial areas. It really needs to say commercial and industrial areas. There is some language in that section that specifies height restrictions for industrial fences, but nothing for commercial fences. So we need to get that height restriction in there. Staff would suggest a 6-foot height limit for commercial fences. Industrial fences can be up to 8 feet. Commercial areas are a little bit less intense, and so we would, anticipate maybe being a lesser height limit for those fences. One other item that came up after we published it, the language that we have in the regulations for trailers and where they can be parked is a little bit ambiguous. The intent is that commercial trailers over 12,000 gross vehicle weight cannot be parked in commercial areas, and trailers related to boats or RVs are subject to the specific requirements that we've put in place for those types of vehicles. The language in there is just really not clear, and so we just need to clean that up and state what types of trailers can be parked where and where they cannot. So the language is in there, it's just not real clear, and every time it comes up we have to kind of hunt and look for it, and it can get a little bit dicey. And then something else that we will take a look at before we come to a public hearing, prior to this last revision last year of the regulations, there were a number of ordinances passed updating different things in the previous version of regulations. And so we will be taking a look at all of those ordinances to make sure that the things that were passed by this board and by the city commission ultimately are included in here, making sure that we're not leaving out anything that really should be included. I know one specific, the city commission had decided at one point prior to me being here that gravel parking pads would be allowed in rear yards. We don't specifically call that out in the regulations right now, but it was something that was passed by the city commission, I think back in like 2012 or so.
Yeah, not too long ago, yeah.
Yeah, so just a few kind of little minor things like that that we need to make sure are included in here so that we're not having to, hunt through ordinances and make sure it's all in one place for you all when you're reviewing things, and we're not having to, look for things that were passed several years ago.
For this fences and subsections, I'm not sure if, I would like you to take a look at the industrial business at the corner of Lawrence and Spruce.
Okay.
They've been doing a lot of excavating in that lot there for parking of equipment.
Oh,
And
yes.
It would really, probably, the city engineer should probably take a look at it, see if it's really, the excavation looks like it could be undermining the adjacent residential property. I'm
not sure what reviews have taken place on
sure.
that, but I will check.
I know that there's probably the state and maybe even federal regulations about undermining adjacent property.
Yeah, because they're doing quite a bit of
Yeah.
dirt removal.
Yeah,
If
and,
you hadn't
you know,
noticed that, when I went by there
possible a
today,
wall or something.
they have been landscaping that and they have put grass seed, and it really started improving it. Because every time I go by, I think, wow, if I was living next door to that, I'd go crazy with what they've done there.
Yeah.
But when I drove by just today, it looks like they've spent more time with what I call more professional shaping it, and it's completely now seeded and straw or something on it. I probably try to make it at least blend in there where it doesn't stain out so bad on the area.
I applaud what he's doing. He's making good use of his property.
Yeah, it is.
I just want to make sure that it doesn't detrimentally affect the adjacent residential property.
Well, it just looks like they started getting bulldozers and started cutting that area
Yeah.
and putting stuff in
You
there.
have
As
to have
they
a
needed more, they
specific
kept
slope
cutting out
and
more.
stuff like that, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I haven't driven by in a few weeks either, so it
Yeah,
sounds like
it looks
it's
a lot better
changed
today.
quite a bit recently.
A comment I have back in the one on trailers and where it parked whenever it was at, does that include travel trailers that people have that are allowed to park in the city for a certain amount of time?
Yeah, and it is intended to. Again, the language is kind of ambiguous in
Right,
there, so we
right.
really need to define what it's addressing and what constitutes a travel trailer or versus a commercial trailer. those are considered differently.
Do we have to look at the time allowance for that, or maybe the commissioners already proved that I think that during the summer, there was an allowance that people had an RV or boat where they can park it during the summer at their property for a couple months, and that's allowed? Is that a done deal?
Yes, the city commission updated that ordinance to allow the recreational vehicles to be
Right.
parked. I believe you can have a maximum of 2 per residential property between, I think it's April 1st and October 31st.
That's okay.
So really that, RV season. Whereas before, you couldn't park it in front of the house. It had to be, couldn't be in a side yard setback. And so their intent was to give people some more leeway in parking those vehicles on their property.
Okay, thank you.
Are you going to be kind of using that model as far as like boat trailers and everything else?
Yeah, so we'll be putting that in there and then just kind of further defining what exactly is included, whether it's a boat trailer or a flatbed trailer, and making sure that distinction is clear for people and for us as well, so that we can stay consistent in how we apply that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, an RV or a boat trailer are different from a flatbed trailer
Right.
being used for construction. so.
Right.
Any other questions for the city planner?
Okay, so we'll be, over the next month, I'll be getting that language finalized, to get these changes incorporated in the regulations. So if you think of anything, in the next few weeks or have any other questions, let me know. And then again, we'll, intend to have a public hearing, and get these, recommendation from the planning commission to forward to the city commission so that we can get these incorporated and, get that cleaned up.
I'm not sure, I think you probably touched on it earlier about this yard decor. Did that include Christmas decorations? Did the changes we made that were approved in 2016, did that include Christmas decorations?
The
There was a
sign
lot of discussion
regulations
on that.
specifically address Christmas and holiday decorations, and that they are exempt from any regulation by the
I
city.
thought that's the way it had been.
Yeah, so
left.
that is called out in the sign regulation chapter, and this is really more like trellises or arbors or bird baths or things like that that are not really meant to be, regulated per se.
I just really hate to get into the area of over-regulating
Right.
what people do on their property.
Right.
Yes. When I was in Lawrence going to school, get my master's degree in planning, and there was a big blow-up over what some people called art in their yard and other people called trash. And it became quite a thing, quite an issue. So,
Yes, it certainly can.
Anything else from the commissioners?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, we're adjourned.
thank you.